So one of my earliest videos on YouTube is actually a refinishing video. It's also one of my most popular. I didn't really have plans to remake it, but recently someone commented on that video because in the video I use a chemical stripper and I mentioned how eco-friendly strippers don't do as good of a job as the more abrasive chemical-based strippers. And someone said that they have come a long way in the past couple years. So I don't do a lot of refinishing work anymore, but certain customers I will kind of bite the bullet and do refinishing work. People that have asked me to do stuff since the beginning of my business, I will do stuff that I don't normally do. And this cool old door kind of came down the list of jobs. So I decided not necessarily to remake that video because the information I have in it is still very valid. But on this piece, I decided to try out a couple different products and a couple different techniques for people that have a variety of tools and don't necessarily want to use abrasive chemical-based strippers. So that's what this video is going to be. After I film this intro, I'm actually going to stain this because this door is going to be stained. And it's going to get a clear coat on it after that, but that probably will not make the video because the stain will have to dry for at least a few days before putting clear on it. But a pretty simple singular video showing you how I take the paint off this door. So this is how the door came to me, and I'm going to take all the hardware off to start as well as the glass, just so I don't have to worry about breaking the glass in my shop. Now I have actually done the identical door for this customer probably 5 years ago at this point. This is the back door and I did the front door for them. So most older knobs like this especially are going to have a set screw. If you remove that set screw, you could take the entire top side of the knob off, and then the back side will slide off as well. So that's pretty much how that comes off. I always try and put the set screw back into place, and I keep all this hardware in a container safely away from other things in my shop because you will lose stuff like this. I've done it before on builds. And then I could start taking the screws out to remove the face plates. So this has a deadbolt on it as well. Those can be a little more difficult to remove on these older doors. In order to remove this one, I had to flip this over and remove the other side as well. You can refinish it with all this stuff in place. It just makes life a lot easier to remove it. So then I didn't think I would be able to take the glass out because this was added after the fact. It's not glazed in place. So I started with covering it with some cordboard just to protect it over time. But once I flipped the door, I realized that there was some decorative molding holding the glass in place, and I was able to take it out. You can see this is the other side, has some sort of varnish over an older stain that has kind of alligatored or flaked over time, probably because the surface below it was not properly prepared for the finish put on top, so it will kind of flake off over time as well. But this is the side that has the molding that I can remove. This is that molding. I can take this stuff off and then pop the glass out, and it's just going to make this door a lot easier to work with. My shop's pretty small. It's easy to drop things on glass, and I didn't want to have to worry about replacing the glass. You can see these pop off pretty easily. I could take the glass out. I kept the cordboard on there because even around my shop, it's just nice to have a protective layer on top of all of this stuff. So I'm just using a chisel to pry this off. I'm keeping all the hardware in there because when I go to put these back in place, it's easiest to put them in the exact same position, realign the holes. This is an oak door, so the wood is very dense, so I could realign the holes and pop this whole thing back into place pretty easily. And then you could see I could take the glass out. This is a pretty large piece of glass as well. And then that was just the back side of the deadbolt. I took the screws off and that popped out of place as well. And now I could flip the door back over and take the other side. Now originally this glass was glazed into place, so the glass was kind of rickety because the old glazing wasn't removed properly. So I ended up scraping all that old glazing off so the glass will sit in there a little nicer. There's 2 side screws in the lock box that holds the deadbolt on. Once you take those off, I could unscrew the deadbolt and take off the last faceplate. And this is kind of nice to take off the hardware because it gives you an idea of what to expect. There's obviously a varnish under multiple layers of paint, and I could tell right away that this is an oak door. Now, like I said, I did the identical sister door for this customer, so I already knew it was going to be oak, but a lot of times when things are painted, sometimes you can't tell. So what I usually use is this more caustic based chemical stripper. I've always had really good success with it. It works out nicely because in my shop I could paint on the stripper, let it do its work, and then I could come over and take off what the stripper takes off. Now this is multiple layers of paint, so one layer of this stripper only took off the top side of the paint. That's pretty common for this sort of stripper. You usually have to do multiple coats. On newer furniture this won't be an issue. On older woods like this where you have multiple layers of finish, it usually takes multiple coats of the stripper to get it off. So this is what it's going to look like after one coat. I'll apply another one, and I'm using a paint scraper to remove most of this stuff. They're great. This is a cheap one from Walmart. It wasn't even $10, and it has a pretty sharp edge on it. It removes paint pretty easily. Now the method I first started using when I started refinishing stuff is a heat gun. The heat gun will take off multiple layers at once. The only problem with the heat gun is you have to stand there for hours on end, slowly moving the heat gun in order to remove the paint, and it smells absolutely terrible. Obviously there's old fumes in this paint. There's most likely some lead-based paint in this process. As you heat all that stuff up, it releases the fumes. But that's basically what the heat gun will look like. I could use this the paint scraper afterwards because, like I said, there's multiple layers of paint and then old varnish. And older varnish is hard to remove, but that paint scraper, if you apply a fair amount of pressure, you could see it will take off that entire layer of varnish and start leaving me with older wood. Now, something I tried this summer when I was redoing a floor was steam took off old tar paper off a floor, so I tried that out on the door. The nice thing about steam is because it condenses once the steam comes out of the machine, the water vapor will condense pretty quickly. It leaves all of this fairly wet, so the fumes are not nearly as severe, and it's once you have the steamer, you don't have to keep buying chemicals. That worked pretty well on the paint. It didn't work great, honestly, and it worked decently on the varnish. So then I went to Amazon and I got an eco-friendly water-based stripper. This was one of the better rated ones that didn't cost a fortune. These get a little expensive. The only problem with this, because I was reading the instructions, is they recommend letting it sit on there at least 3 to 24 hours. So if you want to use something like this, you need to plan ahead. And you have to put a pretty thick coat of stuff on there. And I let this set overnight. I haven't had a lot of success with eco-friendly removers that don't have the caustic chemicals in them. They are biodegradable and earth-friendly. But I've never had a lot of great success with them, so I wasn't expecting much putting that on there. So the process I found for the paint side that worked best was I removed the top layer of paint with the heat gun because that came off pretty quickly, and then the caustic or chemical based stripper removed the varnish that was on the underside in one coat. So that was the process I used for the top. When I came back in the next day, I tried out the eco-friendly stripper and I was amazed at how well it worked. It took off every single layer of paint as well as the varnish in one pass. So I will definitely be using this again. I'm happy someone mentioned it in the comments in the other video. The only thing to consider with this, like I said, is it does have to sit on there for quite a while. But in a shop like mine, it could be a huge time saver to coat the entire top side of a door, which I would have done if I knew how well this was going to work, and then come in the next day and strip all the paint off. So for the detail, there's really no great way to do detailing. I had some of the caustic stripper, which I'm putting on now, because unfortunately at this point I had a very strict timeline with this door. I didn't have enough time to let that other stuff set up overnight at this point. because I had to flip this over and do the other side. So the sawdust you see me using is just because it soaks up all the leftover solvent, so it makes this process a lot easier. The sawdust helps from gumming up all of your tools. So I'll put the stripper on, I'll use a wire brush to remove the paint, and then sawdust to clean it up with the wire brush. Now the wire brush, this is after 2 or 3 coats. The wire brush works great on this because it's oak, it doesn't mess up the finish. If you have a pine door or a softwood door, I'd be careful with the wire brush because it could really mar up the surface. So then on the back side, I'm going to try all 4 again just to see how they work. The heat gun works really well on this top side varnish. It takes it right off. You could see, and then I'm left with this. I'm assuming this was some sort of very old red stain. That did not come off with the heat gun. So here's the caustic base stripper. Once again, it took off the top varnish really well. You can see I'm using the sawdust in order to soak up some of that solvent, and then underneath I still have the red stain. Nothing took everything off in one go. You can see that this is some sort of faux finish because they painted knots into it. So then for the steamer worked pretty well on this. You could see it takes off. Once again, that topside finish came off really easily. The red stain the steamer did not have much of an effect on that red stain. I probably will not use steaming going forward with furniture like this. So then the process I used on this was, once again, I used the heat gun because it was really quick to take off that topside varnish, but then the chemical stripper worked really well to remove that red stain, which the heat gun and the steamer did not do. So that was kind of the process I used. This is what it looked like beforehand. You know you still have finish on there. If you could see it reflecting back at you like that, that's still varnish on the finish. You want it to look dull, then you know you're down to bare wood. And then this is after using the chemical-based stripper. So I do take this down pretty far. Unfortunately on this side, because there was some sort of red stain on there, you're never going to be able to get that out of the grain unless you bleach the wood. So then I did a test piece with the eco-friendly finish, and once again it worked awesome. It took every single layer of finish off, which no other product could do that. Now this, I didn't let it set up overnight. I put it on in the morning and I took it off in the afternoon. So like I said, I was really pleasantly surprised with this product. Then for the detailing, because the eco-based stripper works so well, I decided to put it on the other side, let it set up overnight, and then I went through and cleaned that up. Now because these divots in this detailing are so thick, the stripper did remove a lot of it, but I still had to go through and kind of pick out that white paint. This is one of the reasons I don't do a lot of refinishing work. It takes up a lot of space, it takes up a lot of time, but it is a very, very engaged process getting it done. It just takes a long time. So once I had the stripper on both sides done and I was down to pretty much bare wood, I went through with a belt sander and took it down to almost completely clean wood. This is an 80 grit belt in there, and it worked really well to take it all down. Because there's multiple finishes on this, you're still going to get a little bit of blotchiness in the top part of the finish. And then once that was done, you could see that's the part that hasn't been sanded yet. I could go through with my orbital sander, kind of get the spots I couldn't get with the belt sander. So you can see I can get the edges and stuff like that with the orbital sander. I did work my way up to getting this to 120 grit. But you could see it's really pretty oak. If this was my door, I would have clear coated this and kept it the way it was now because it was really nice. Now I usually don't use a pre-stain on oak because oak takes stain really well. It doesn't really need it. But because the surface was kind of blotchy, just because there were multiple layers of different finishes on there that absorbed into the wood differently, and over time stains and stuff can happen on doors, I did decide to put a pre-stain on this before staining it. Now the interesting thing is, you could see with these older doors, there's usually a veneer on the top side. You could see where the top side is veneer oaked, and the core of the door is most likely some sort of poplar or pine. They were trying to save money back then as well. So then for the detailing, I'm using a paint scraper to help remove some of that leftover red finish. These things are awesome. I have a set just for refinishing, so I don't mess up my nice set. and they could go through and remove a thin layer of a stain and remove that kind of red finish that was still on there. So the original door I did, the customer wanted a poly shades finish on there, I believe they're called. I don't use them anymore because I hate them, and they have polyurethane and stain. They don't make the color that I put on the original door anymore, which I was kind of happy about because I really don't like poly shades. But luckily the color they had on the poly shades was called Honey, and Minwax now makes a honey stain. So I'm just staining this honey, and then they actually took the door, because since it's an exterior door, this is going to have to sit for like 3 days before you could put a clear coat on it. So I'm going to do that at the house, and that will not be in the video. And then I could go through and reattach all the hardware, put the glass back in, and then they could come pick it up. I did both sides with the stain. I was pretty happy with how this looked. I was a little nervous because there was still some red stain on the back side of this door, but so far it looked pretty good. So then for the glass, because the glass was kind of moving around a little bit in the frame, I did decide to put a very thin layer of window glaze in there so that it has some sort of cushion between the wood and the glass. This was obviously retrofitted in here because there used to be window glaze, and they took that out at some point and added the molding. And then I could put the glass in, and now it sits in there really nicely, having that that little bit of a cushion with that glaze. You could just press it into place. And then I refinished the wooden strips for this on the side. I didn't film it. Like I said, I kept all the hardware in there so I could easily hammer everything back into place and hold that glass into place. So then for the hardware, I do like to buff these a little bit just to take all the oxidation off of them. This is just a wire wheel in my drill. It takes all that oxidation off. I don't like to take, you could take this down to probably shiny brass, which is most likely what it is. I do like them to still look a little antiqued, but you could see it. This is really quick work, and I could reattach the doorknob, and that's what the door looks like. If I get finished photos of this with the clear coat on, because the clear coat obviously will make it look a little bit nicer, I'll try and update the thumbnail for this project.